have somebody lead us off in a roll call as well.
Right. Okay. So I'm going to ask Hector to take us through the webinar protocols fairly quickly, and then Dina will call roll call, and then we can move on to the introductions very briefly and the minutes. So Hector?
Okay. Good afternoon. For this webinar, microphones will be automatically muted and video will be off for all public attendees. Video will remain off for public attendees even while speaking. If you have a question, please post it in the Q&A box, and the speaker or co-chair will comments at the end of questions or comments at the end of each agenda item. If you do have a question, you can use the raise hand function and to direct your question to a speaker or that agenda item. For attending on the phone, *9 is what you need to press to raise your hand, and *6 is to mute and unmute yourself. Please don't use the mute button function on your phone. And there will be a public comment period at the end of each agenda. If you plan to comment, please state your name, your agency, and the matter that you wish to address in the Q&A. And then when you are called, staff will unmute your microphone. And again, please state your name, agency, organization, or interest group that you represent if applicable. And then all speakers will be limited to 2 minutes during that time. That concludes the protocols.
Great. Dina, can you call roll of the committee, please?
Madera Chamber of Commerce, Debbie Bray. MVP Realty, John Reed.
Here.
Red Barn Cafe owner, Lisa Soroyan. Visit Yosemite Madera County, Rhonda Salisbury. City of Chowchilla, Mayor Palmer. City of Chowchilla, Rod Pruitt. City of Chowchilla, Jason Rogers.
I'll add that they were all, oh, sorry, but I was gonna say, I will add that they were all just at the State of the County meeting and maybe haven't gotten to computers yet.
I was going to say the same thing. Thank you.
Should we just wait to call roll in for another 15 minutes, maybe after the next couple of agenda items?
That'd be fine.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Then we can move to the meeting minutes.
Oh, sure. What'd you say?
We'll go ahead
So,
and move to the meeting minutes and wait on the roll call. If
okay.
everyone can mute their phone, their computer as well, please.
Okay.
Who's not speaking?
So our next order of business would be approving the meeting minutes from the meeting of November 18th, 2021. First of all, are there any comments in regards to the meeting minutes? Seeing and hearing none, I'll accept a motion for approval.
Jason Rogers, I make a motion for approval.
We have a motion.
Rodriguez, second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. And rather than have a roll call vote, if there's anybody in objection to the approval of the minutes of November 18th, please state so. Hearing no objections, the minutes are approved. The next item would be the overview of the federal infrastructure bill. And Tricia, I believe that you're on.
Yes, thank you. I didn't expect it to come up so soon. So, okay, anyway. So I know all of you have been hearing about it in the news, and there's information out there regarding an influx of transportation funding or infrastructure funding, water funding. So I just thought we'd have it on the agenda just to explain it a little bit and just real briefly. So it's called the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And this is one of the first acronyms that doesn't really have an acronym that you can call it like T or iced tea or some sort of name that would roll off your tongue. So they are changing the name to the bill, and it's the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. So we will be referring it to most of the time as the bill. And it is next slide, please. it is a $1.2 trillion in total spending. So you've been hearing about it in the news about how this is the next economic recovery package, or it's a once in a lifetime generation investment. It mainly addresses provisions related to federal aid highways, transit, highway safety, motor carrier research, hazardous materials, and rail programs. The new funding amount is $550 billion. So it's 1.2 trillion in total spending, but the new spending amount is 550 billion, and it includes the 5-year transportation reauthorization bill as well. Included in the package, there are some benefits. California is guaranteed to receive approximately 40 million in formula transportation funding. There's a list of it here on your screen. I'm not going to go through each of the programs and the dollar amounts, but it should be noted that California does have an agreement with local transportation agencies to divide federal aid highway funding apportioned to California, and that split is a 60-40 split. So 60% is controlled by the state and 40% by the local agencies. It is unknown at this time if that will continue. I'm sure it will, since precedence has been set, but that's really remains to be discussed as the funding reaches the state of California. Next slide, please. There are existing programs that are receiving additional funding. And there's also in the existing programs where there's going to be some expanded criteria and projects that may not have been eligible and may be eligible now. The programs basically focus on climate action and equity, freight, goods movement, rail, and transit, and others. So there's a list on this slide that lists the existing programs, and it also discusses the amounts and how much will be increased. The increase won't happen, of course, all in 1 year. It's going to be averaged out over the next 5 years in increments. Next slide, please. There are, a number of discretionary programs, grant programs that are new. And so there's a list here. I won't go through those either. But what you can take away from this is there's going to be a lot of new programs out there, a lot of new funding potential opportunities, and it will be competitive. And so we will be looking forward to that. It begins in FY 2022 to 2026. I forgot to mention that earlier. It's a 5-year program, and it's only from 2022 to 2026. Next slide, please. In addition to the transportation programs and infrastructure, there's also some non-transportation infrastructure funding opportunities out there. And that would be for wildfire, broadband, airport, and protection against cyber attacks. Next slide, please. So where does Madera fit into this equation? There's a lot of uncertainty out there. There's going to be legislation for some of the programs that will still need to be developed, and regulations. New guidance packages will be developed even for the existing programs, since there's some expansion on some of the existing programs. And then obviously you have to come up with some new guidance for the new program. So that takes time. So it's not going to be automatic right away. There are some current programs that we will see an increase, a slight increase the first year, and then it'll continue to increase for the next subsequent 4 years. So we have a few programs that we know that will receive a slight increase, and that's the congestion mitigation and air quality program, our metropolitan planning, our highway and bridge funding, transit funding. It should be noted there's a new bridge program. So there'll be some bridge program opportunities for funding for those types of projects. There's some new funding that also will apply to Madera. There's a promoting resilient operations for transformative, efficient, and cost-saving transportation grant program. There's a carbon reduction program. So we are here, next slide, please, at Madera County Transportation Commission, kind of just in a wait and see mode to see, what kind of opportunities might be before us as we move forward in planning for our future transportation planning. there's some talk out there as to why would we need a local sales tax measure if we are going to see a huge increase in infrastructure funding. Well, as I mentioned earlier, this is 2022 to 2026. It's a 5-year program. By the time Measure T this renewal of Measure T is implemented, we'll be looking at some sort of additional or another type of a 5-year program. This will have already been sunset. But the beauty of Measure T is it's locally controlled, and we have local funds. Through Measure T, we can control those dollars. We know when they're coming in. We can spend them according to our investment plan. But where I see where Madera might fit in with our measure program is to try to leverage the most that we can with all the potential funding opportunities that might be before us. So for discussion and for this purpose and our renewal effort would be to have some sort of funding going to in certain programs to grant writing, for instance, because it looks like we're going to need quite a bit of grant writing opportunity, or being able to go after those funds, resources available to us to be able to go after the various grants that might be available. We'll continue and move forward with our multimodal planning. We're working on our regional transportation plan at this time and our sustainable community strategy. We just need to sit back and try to figure out how does the funding, federal funding, fit into Madera's vision. We want to be, cautiously moving forward, not overly optimistic. We need to, to do the best we can. What programs fit best for Madera County, and then, gather our resources and move in that direction. So maximizing those resources as efficiently and effectively as possible. Staff need to start laying the groundwork now. I encourage our local jurisdictions to look and dive deeper into it, to see what kind of, where do resources need to be directed, if at all. Make sure our planning studies align with our community needs and our funding opportunities. Work in partnership with our, our partners at the state, our District 6, and at our federal government and state headquarters. As I mentioned earlier, we need to strengthen the grant writing. And then it should be noted that this is not a permanent fix for transportation funding. There is still a need to address the Highway Trust Fund. And so this is one step in that direction. At least we have another few more years to kind of look at what other funding opportunities are for the Highway Trust Fund. So we need to continue to work with our congressional delegation and representatives. And basically the message that I really wanted to send here is there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. We're still digesting it before we can really regurgitate all the details regarding the bill. I guess the devil's in the details. So stay tuned. And so hopefully the Measure T or other types of funding resources will be available to us to at least leverage some of those funding opportunities that may be before us sometime in the near future. So that's really, I just wanted to give a brief overview because I know it's in the news and I know you're hearing about it. And I know that there's questions out there about why would we want a half-cent sales tax? Why would we want to continue if there's all this money falling from the trees out there? So with that, I'll open it up for any kind of questions. I don't have specifics or details other than an overview at this time.
Okay, thank you very much, Tricia. We'll open up for questions, and there is a question from Frank, and his question is California to receive 40 million or 40 billion? And the second question, would there be a way to determine what Madera County could hope to receive?
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Billion just, it seems such like a huge number, even a million does. I can never see that in my bank account, but yes, it's a billion. So 40 billion. Yes, we will be looking at it once all the information becomes available. It really has not reached the state level yet. I do have a call tomorrow to hear from the state of California. They're holding a teleconference call to discuss this a little bit further. They're probably going to let us know that the legislature needs to meet and reconvene, and the California Transportation Commission, and they need to see how quickly we can get which funds to the street as fast as we can, and which ones are going to take a little bit longer.
Okay.
This is Georgina. One thing that we need to keep in mind is that there have always been infrastructure bills. There was ICE-T, Next-T. Now we've got the bill. But it's never been enough money. We have project funding needs that well exceed what we could ever hope to receive from the federal government. So I think that's something to keep in mind. It's also been some time since we've seen a federal appropriation bill for transportation. It's not just been the last 5 years, it's been some time before that. So it's important to understand that we need our local dollars to so that we can continue to address the transportation needs within the county. And as Tricia mentioned, to use Measure T to leverage those federal and state dollars as they become available.
Okay. Very good. Thank you, Georgina. It looks like Mr. Curley has his hand up and he's wearing his USC colors today.
By accident. I'm not sure what it represents, but I'll go with USC for you Supervisor. Hey, Patricia, thanks for the update. Listening to you talk, and actually during your update, you mentioned regional transportation plan, and it just got me thinking. I'm guessing there is a transportation plan for Madera County, and we may have already gone over it during this as a part of this meeting, a prior meeting. But I would just love to see it. And I'm assuming there's a plan against which you vet and consider and weigh all kinds of different funding opportunities, whether it's Measure T or federal funding. So certainly it'd be helpful for me to see it. And again, if you've already shared it, I apologize. I don't recall. So
Absolutely, your timing's perfect. We are in the process of updating our regional transportation plan and our sustainable community strategy. There's going to be a number of workshops coming up. And it is, you're right, it is a plan that identifies all funding sources and a list of projects, if you will. It has to be financially constrained, but there is a wish list of projects. I guess you're not on our mailing list, so we will add you to our mailing list so that you're aware of when these workshops might be coming up, and as we're in the process of developing it. I think Dylan Stone is on the call right now. He is our project manager. If he would like to add a couple comments related to that, because that's definitely perfect timing related to their Measure T and the renewal and the regional transportation plan are working parallel together.
okay, yeah, that's helpful. And you know what, it sounds familiar, and something tells me I've seen an email and I might be on your distribution list. And it would just obviously will. As we look at Measure T funding, we should probably consider it in the context of the broader strategy as well. So, all right, that's helpful.
Right,
Thank you.
and we have presented material on funding in previous meetings. So if you go to the website for Measure T, there should be a PowerPoint presentation that we've presented to this committee before that would include some of that information.
Okay, thank you for the reminder. Appreciate it.
Sure, not a problem.
Hey, and Tim, our existing adopted RTP is from 2018. We update it every 4 years, and that is also available on our website with all of its supporting technical documentation. And then that's going to be under the transportation tab. And there's also a link there for our current ongoing updated of the next plan, the 2022 RTP.
Okay, thanks, Dylan. I will take some time to educate myself.
No problem.
All right, well, thank you, Tim. We have a question from John Reed, and he says, can we separate which funding sources specifically require matching or leverage funds?
And if you're referring to the new, the bill, yes, we will be able to identify which ones are new programs that will require matching funds. It all depends on the guidance packages and the guidelines that are developed on what the amount of matching funds are required. And so we would definitely be able to identify which projects would need matching dollars and whether or not which kind of source of funding would fit that category. You know, it's very complex. It gets down to the details on, you know, does our Transportation Development Act funds, are they eligible to match a certain other program? So only certain funds can match certain programs. So we would have to really take a look at the guidance when those are released.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Anybody else? Questions regarding this item? Seeing and hearing none.
I'm so sorry.
yeah.
I raised my hand, but I should have just spoken up. I wanted to elevate a concern I have, which is that I know we're talking about identifying which projects that are already kind of on the county's radar we'd want to be able to look at funding for and then develop Measure T around matching funding for. But I actually think that the development of an investment plan for Measure T should kind of go the opposite way of doing community engagement around what priorities folks out in the community have around projects they want to see Measure T fund, and develop the investment plan from there, and then determine where that can be matched with state and federal funds. And so I just want to make sure that as we make decisions at a steering committee, that those are based off of actual outreach in the community with residents from all over Madera County, and that the public participation component of the Measure T renewal isn't just focused on, do you want a local sales tax measure or not, right? It should be focused on what investments do people want to see, and not just developing the investment plan based on existing county priorities. Thanks.
But that's the whole purpose of the steering committee. So yeah, absolutely. I think you'll hear later on the agenda some of the public outreach opportunities that we're going to be moving forward with. So it definitely will be reaching out and engaging the public as we developed, even our regional transportation plan along with our measure renewal.
All right, very good. Thank you. Councilmember Rodriguez.
Yes, thank you, Chair Poitras. Tricia, on one of your bullet points there, and this may be a broad question here, but you had mentioned that fixing the permanent fix to the Highway Trust Fund. Would you be able to elaborate, or maybe for myself, maybe some folks here on the call, as far as what are the things that are currently broken in that system, if I may? Is there something that you can highlight on that?
The trust fund has been in a deficit for many years and has had to been backfilled, but it's basically related to do with gas taxes. And so there isn't enough gas tax that has been, the gas tax has not been raised since the early 1990s. And so it has to do with the gas tax. And then also as we shift into electric vehicles, we will also see that account diminishing. So there's some way that they will need to take a look at the Highway Trust Fund and how are we going to fund that Highway Trust Fund, or is there another means to fund it? So I think with the times and how the times are changing with electric vehicles, I mean, this has been a problem for many years now. This is not new. The Highway Trust Fund, it's really goes back to the federal gas tax and how it has not been increased since the early 90s.
So with the additional funding, then you would say that they're going to try to fix this permanently by maybe a different method of collecting, being that we're going to get away from that gas tax and possibly going into some type of road mile or something like that. Is that what?
Most likely, it is a political decision, and I think that's probably why there hasn't been an answer or a resolution. It comes down to some of the politics, but yes, they'll need to identify some other source of funding that would fund the Highway Trust Fund.
Thank you, Tricia. Appreciate the presentation.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? Feel free to speak up. All right, hearing and seeing none, why don't we go back to the roll call? I think this is a good time to do that.
Okay. All right, Madera Chamber of Commerce, Debbie Bray. MVP Realty, John Reed.
Here.
Red Barn Cafe owner, Lisa Soroyan. Visit Yosemite, Madera County, Rhonda Salisbury. City of Chowchilla, Mayor Palmer.
Here, and it's just council member now.
Okay, very good, thank you.
As of last night.
City of Chowchilla, Rod Pruitt.
Here.
City of Chowchilla, Jason Rogers.
Here.
Councilmember Rodriguez.
Here.
City of Madera, Mayor Garcia. City of Madera, Arnaldo Rodriguez.
Here, and also for the record, I do see Debbie Bray on the call as well. You mentioned her a few minutes ago.
Thank you, Arnaldo. City of Madera, Keith Helmuth.
Here.
City of Madera, Ellen Bitter.
Here.
City of Madera, David Huff.
Here.
LA Children's Hospital, Tim Curley.
I am here.
And Madera County Public Health Department, Sarah Bose.
Here.
And Supervisor Frazier.
Here.
Supervisor Poitras.
Yes.
And Madera County, Jay Varney.
Here.
And Madera County, Matt Traber.
Here.
Thank you. Madera County, Derek Carter.
Yes, I'm here.
And Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability, Madeline Harris.
Here.
And Camarena Health Center, Paulo Soros.
Here.
And Camarena Health Center, Nicole Mosqueda.
Here.
And Madera County Farm Bureau, Christina Beckstead.
Here.
Creekside Farming, Devinder Mahill.
Here.
Madera County Superintendents of Schools, Opie Rohr. Madera Community College, Dr. Angel Reyna. CAL FIRE, Matt Watson.
Here.
California Department of Transportation, Mike Navarro.
Here.
Building Industry Association, Michael Prandini.
Here.
Madera County Economic Development Commission, Bobby Kahn.
Here.
Tahibidi Chapter of the Sierra Club, Bill Philbo. MCTA, Patricia Taylor. Central Council Labor Council, Mike Lopez. Central California Labor Council, Chuck Riojas. Social Service Transportation Advisory Council, Frank Simonis.
Here.
And our Active Transportation Advocate, Jeffrey Wheeler.
Here.
And we also have Active Transportation with Conrad. San Joaquin Regional Rail Commission, Paul Herman.
Here.
San Joaquin Regional Rail Commission, Dan Levitt. Our student representative from Madera Community College, Jonathan Stromer. Citizens Community Advocate, Derek Robinson. And our citizens.
I did see him on there, Dina. I believe I saw.
him
Okay.
as well. Thanks, Georgina.
Yeah.
And then our Citizens Community Advocate, Donald Holley. Okay, that concludes roll call.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And I really appreciate everybody's participation today. It's really, really important. We're going to be moving quickly with this measure, and everybody's participation is important, but we're going to blink and we'll be at the election day. So again, thank you so much, and looking forward as we continue moving towards the measure. So there was a question in regards to whether or not we, before the roll call, we didn't know if we had a quorum, and I wasn't quite sure if, what the rules were in regards to approving the minutes. Can anybody provide some guidance in that regard?
Troy or Tricia?
Yeah, if I know we've got way over 50%. attendance. I'm not sure what constitutes a quorum, but if we need to re-vote on that, we can do that at this time.
I believe that the ground rules and the roles and responsibilities had mentioned that we try to achieve consensus as much as possible, and that if we cannot achieve a consensus, then we go to majority vote.
Okay. So why don't we let's go ahead and just re-vote on the meeting minutes. I'll ask everybody if they've had a chance to review the minutes. And if you have, I'll accept a motion for action regarding the minutes.
Move to approve, Bobby Kahn.
Jason Drews, I'll second.
Okay, thank you. And what we'll do, rather than spending the time to go through a roll call vote, if there's any objections to the minutes or the motion to approve the minutes, please say so at this time.
Mr. Prathis?
Poitras, yeah.
Poitras, excuse me. At our last meeting, Madeline talked about a concern about induced demand, and I think Caltrans responded that they didn't expect induced demand from some, but I'd like to see the minutes reflect a concern that projects that we do not induce demand, do not create more traffic from where there has been less traffic.
Okay, Georgina, do you have a response?
We'll go back to the actual recording for the minutes for the meeting and double check that, and we'll make sure to reflect whatever is appropriate.
Okay, thank you.
All right, very good. Hearing no other comments or objections to approval, the minutes are approved. On item number 3, it's the Measure T investment plan goals, objectives, and transportation system priorities. And so Georgina, I believe you and Rose will be leading the charge on this item.
Correct. Thank you very much. So, so that we can move forward with the identification of programs that will be included in the measure, the first thing we would like to make sure that we all understand are what are the goals and objectives that we're trying to accomplish with the new measure or renewal. And then also, what are the priorities? And in previous meetings, we've asked all of the members to provide us with what are their priorities for the new measure. Rose has been in contact with a number of you who were not at that original meeting where we did that. We asked you to provide your priorities during the session. So she's contacted a number of additional members over the last few weeks to also ensure that we have your opinions as well as to what the priorities for this new measure might be. The reason that it's important is because we're at the point now where the next step is to start to identify what are the programs that we're going to try to move forward with the new measure. Currently, the programs that are in place are the Regional Transportation Program, which really, or the Safe Routes to School program that focuses on major street and road improvements, the Local Transportation Improvement Program or transportation system, which focuses on neighborhood and community streets and roads, a flexible program which provides for funds for any transportation purpose, street and highway maintenance to make sure that the current facilities are maintained and addressed, make sure that potholes are repaired, etc. There's also a number of other programs that address different forms of transportation, including bikeways, pedestrian facilities, public transit, etc. And so those are the types of programs that we need to start thinking about for this new measure. So the first step is to identify the goals and objectives. The next step is to identify what we heard from you in terms of your priorities for the new measure. The third step is to look at starting to identify those programs. The next step will be to identify, once those programs have been determined, to identify the percent of funding from the new measure that should go to each of those programs. How much should be spent on maintenance? How much should be spent on public transit, et cetera. Following that, we'll need to look at those major street and highway projects. What are they? As mentioned, the Madera County Transportation Commission is currently in the process of identifying and updating their regional transportation plan and sustainable community strategy. As a part of that process, they're asking each of the local jurisdictions, as well as Caltrans, to submit a list of projects for all modes of transportation. And that a lot of that work's already been done. And they've also established prioritization criteria to prioritize those projects by mode. So a lot of that work is already complete. And the next step for us then would be to look at, once they've evaluated how much funding they have available to accommodate all the projects between now and the year 2046, what are those projects and what are they in priority order, so that we can start to look at what are those priorities, what are those projects, and which ones should receive at least partial or full funding from the Measure T process. Once that's completed, then the next step will be for us to identify how will these programs be implemented? What are the eligible projects under each of the programs? What are the projects or programs that will be eligible for those Measure T dollars? What are the specific requirements for the local jurisdictions, Caltrans and others, to receive those funds? And what is the timing for expenditure of those funds? So there's quite a bit of work to do. And so this is really kicking off how we arrive at the base for this process, which is what are the programs that we're going to focus on with the new measure. So with that in mind, I'll ask Rose to quickly give an overview of the process she's been under over the last few weeks to contact each of you and receive information from you. And then I'll take you through these goals, objectives, as well as the priorities. Rose? Rose, are you there?
Can you all hear me? I apologize. I'm having some technical difficulties.
No, that's okay. Just briefly, I know you're not feeling well. You've got laryngitis, so we'll just hope that you can get through it fairly quickly.
Okay. I hope, well, we started this conversation a few meetings ago, and we want to hear from each of you, the sector that you represent, and get your top 3 transportation priorities. Many of you shared those. We put together a matrix. If you haven't shared them, I've tried emailing or contacting you if we have a phone number. I know Christina has her hand up. She maybe has some things she wants to share. I know I've tried to get a hold of her and she's been in and out of the office. But our whole goal is to make sure that each sector is heard from. If someone, let's say for the city of Madera, has made some comments, I've asked, for instance, if the mayor has additional things they want to add. Some people have given cited projects. Other people have said safety concerns, for instance, and then listed the need for bike lanes, the need for fixing potholes, the need for fixing certain intersections. So we're trying to do as much of the work with all of you, make sure that you've talked to all of your groups that you're representing, and then we can start the conversations of what Georgina has reviewed. So if you want to email me your information, that we can add it to the matrix. We just have a few people that we need to hear from.
Sounds good. Thanks, Rose. So once I get through the goals, objectives, then we can go ahead and answer any questions, and then we'll move on to those priorities. So the first goal is equitable access to effective transportation options for all, regardless of race, income, national origin, age, location, physical ability, or other factor. It's important that we address equity in our new measure. This is something that almost all of the self-help counties have been focused on over the last few years with their measures as well. And it's important that we ensure that the entire county is addressed in this process. I'm not going to go through the detail of the objectives, but all of this information has been sent out to you prior to the meeting. So you should have all had it last week. Hopefully if you have any comments, we can talk about those once I get through each one of these goals. The next one is a multimodal transportation system. Systems that are fully accessible, encourage quality and sustainable growth and development, and support the region's resource management strategies, and are responsive to the needs of current as well as future travelers. So again, we have a list of objectives that support that goal. I will mention that a lot of these goals and objectives come from the Regional Transportation Plan, Sustainable Community Strategy, because that is the planning document for the county as it relates to transportation. So we don't want to be too far off from what's already included and what's already being addressed as part of the Regional Transportation Plan. We want to make sure that Measure T is consistent with those goals and objectives. Next, we have the goal of transportation systems that stimulate, support, sustain, and enhance the movement of people and goods to foster economic competitiveness. It's important that Madera be competitive with its neighbors, as well as other counties within the state, other counties and states within the United States and within and around the world. Madera is an area where there are a number of crops, a number of processes that occur that are purchased from all over the world. And it's important that the transportation system accommodate that need as we move forward. So the objectives are there as well. Next, the transportation goal of transportation system coordination and intermodal connectivity to keep people and goods moving. So we know that we have some gaps in the system where we go from 2 lanes to 4 lanes back to 2 lanes. And that not only poses a safety issue, but it also poses a time constraint issue on our motoring public. So we need to make sure that where we have transportation gaps, and they could be with the bikeway system, it could be with sidewalks along a particular facility where all of a sudden there are no sidewalks, and the next thing you know, they're there again. And that's especially true of around schools, making sure that all of the sidewalks and that all the students have accessibility to the facilities without having to transition between with and without sidewalks or with and without curb and gutter, especially in rainy conditions, et cetera. So all of those things are very important. Next, we have the goal of efficient, safe, and secure transportation systems in the Madera region. So it's important that we address potholes, that we address infrastructure improvements, whether they be transit related. In other words, the stops, the transit stops, making sure that they're up to speed and that they accommodate the transit public, that there are shelters, et cetera, that are accommodating, but that we also make sure that we repair the system and keep it in good condition. And we address some of that with the presentations that were made by each of the jurisdictions over the last couple of months. Next, we have adequate funding to maintain and improve the transportation network. Funding is an issue. It's not an easy process. It's a very complicated process, as Tricia mentioned earlier, and Troy knows very well. He does a great job of keeping track of what are the constraints, what are the regulations, what can we do, what can't we do. And he works with all of the local jurisdictions to ensure that all of them are being assisted in every way possible. So we need to look at what are the modal funding sources, what can we do with those funds, and how best to maximize the funding. And especially when it comes to measure funding, how can we leverage those dollars to bring more federal and state dollars to the county? Next, we have reliable transportation choices through the public participation process. And that was something that I think that's been mentioned by the Leadership Council. It's important to get out to all of the groups within the county, not just those that traditionally show up to meetings, but all of the various jurisdictions, the unincorporated communities, the incorporated communities, and make sure that we give them the opportunity to let us know what are the issues as it relates to transportation and how best can we assist them as we develop this plan. Next, and finally, we have vibrant communities that are supported by sustainable transportation systems. It's one thing to get a system in, but you have to sustain it. It has to be maintained. There's going to be ongoing operations related to the system, especially as it relates to transit and maintaining streets and roads. So it's important that we understand that and that we coordinate with each of the jurisdictions to mitigate any environmental impacts that may be associated with the system that's been in place or that will be put in place in the future. So with that, are there any questions that anyone has related to these plans, to the Measure T plan goals and objectives?
I believe we have Christina Beckstead, we have Frank, we have Sarah, and then we have others, I'm sure, after that. So why don't we go ahead and start with Christina Beckstead.
That sounds great. And we're really looking for, is there something we missed? And we definitely will take your comments into consideration and make sure to address them to the extent that we can in a revised set of goals and objectives.
Thank you, Supervisor Fraser, or I'm sorry, Poitras. My apologies, Rob. Supervisor Poitras and Georgina. A couple of questions on, thank you, first of all, for synthesizing these goals into a more readable and concise document. Secondly, on one of the goals, let's see, options for other options, where was it? Basically talking about the busing opportunities and bike paths and that kind of a thing. I had asked a couple meetings ago about studies being done as to how many people are using our public transportation method here in Madera, with now the new city bus depot that actually is right behind our facility. The question still remains, is that a viable use of our funds if it isn't being adequately utilized to put more funding into that program? And I think someone was going to look into that and get back to us. If I missed it, I apologize. Secondly, before this steering committee commenced, there were individual meetings with, I think, many of us to discuss some of these priorities, which I think are pretty much covered here. But I'm curious because I know I received several emails while I was out of the office the last few weeks wanting our input, if our input from that prior meeting was included in this as well.
Yes, we've actually taken into consideration all of those interviews that were done with stakeholders, and I believe most of you were interviewed as a part of that process by our subconsultant TBW BH, which is Props and Measures, Alex and Charles. We also took into consideration any of the feedback that we've received through the public engagement process, through the surveys that have been done, through the polling the initial poll that was done, and we provided you with a synopsis of those poll results, I believe, at the first or second meeting of the steering committee. So yes, we've taken all of that information into consideration as we prepared these goals and objectives as well as the priorities. And we can get you that information on transit. The city of Madera is in the process of updating its transit plan, and it will have, and maybe they can speak to this, but they will have some preliminary information related to ridership, et cetera, available, I believe, in the very near future.
Thank you.
And if I can just tag on to that, Christina, this is Rose. I'm the one that sent all those emails and left voice messages, basically to find out if, since that initial interview, if there were any priorities that might have changed for your industry, your sector, and just give you another opportunity. But again, as Georgina said, if there's something here that we've missed, now's an opportunity for you to review this and get back to us in the near future to let us know if we've missed something.
Thank you, Rose. I appreciate that clarification. I think for the most part, this pretty well covers everything that is of great concern to us.
Yeah, I think most of the ag things have been, covered, but absolutely things have changed. It's been a challenging time, so there might be some new things that have come up. So we just don't want to miss anything for any of the sectors and all of you that are involved in the steering committee. So that's why I've continued to reach out to everybody. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And we have a question from Frank. Will special road districts be included in the funding priorities?
Well, that's a that's a good question. Special road districts are districts, and maybe Jared can speak to this from the county, where funding is collected for those specific road improvements within that district. I'm not sure that Measure T funds have ever been allocated to those streets and roads, but Jared, maybe you can help us answer that question.
Yeah, good afternoon, Georgina. Thank you. Actually, we do have special district money in Measure T right now. There is a
Okay, great.
component of Measure T that is maintenance districts. And
Good.
I know that that funding is used a little differently among the agencies, but from the county's perspective, yeah, that money actually goes towards matching funds in those special districts. So when we have
Great.
special districts who generate their own funds, like you mentioned, Georgina, we utilize the Measure T to help match those funds and do improvement projects in those districts as they're eligible to be able to do that.
Great. Sounds good. Does that
May
answer
I
your
ask,
question, Frank?
I have a clarification. So what we've done in the past is, I believe it's 400,000 a year total, 100,000 per quarter to be used for maintenance, vegetation mitigation on these special road districts, which are private streets, not county maintained. Majority of them are in District 5 up in the mountains, which falls under a fire problem if they're not maintained. But the money was never increasing as the years went on and the costs increased. It's a static number. Were we going to address that amount being static to increase with the cost of living and the cost of doing business? And will we address upping the amount since it's been 16 years since it was adjusted?
Yeah, as I mentioned previously, the next step in this process is to identify the programs. So assuming that there's a program, which I'm assuming there will be for maintenance, then we can start to talk about the allocation of funding to those programs. But I think the next step, we would be getting ahead of ourselves if we were to start to talk about, whether or not, or what percentage of funding should go to which program, since we haven't established those yet. But that is the next step, is to identify those programs. One will include maintenance. And then once we've got that nailed down, we'll start to talk about what projects are eligible and how much funding should go to those programs.
Yeah, Georgina, this is Jared. Just one quick question, comment on that too, to Frank's point. The percentages to the programs as they sit now, Frank, are set at a certain percentage. So I don't know that there's anything in the program right now that changes those as costs increase. But I understand your point is costs of things get more expensive. I don't know if that's something that can be addressed and how this is put together, but I guess we'll figure that out, like Georgina said.
Yeah, we'll be looking at implementing guidelines as well. And so we can specify whether or not there needs to be an increase annually, et cetera. So that's something that will be worked out when we get to the implementing guidelines.
All right. Well, thank you very much. There's 3 hands up. I see Madeline, Sarah, and Derek. Madeline, let's go to you.
Okay, thanks. I was thinking one of the areas that's missing on the goals is the right for all people to have a healthy environment and healthy air quality, regardless of race, income, national origin, age, location, physical ability, or any other factor. And I think it would make sense to add that to the last goal, since we're talking about thriving communities with sustainable transportation. So I just wanted to note that I think it is absolutely critical, given the poor air quality in Madera County, for us to incorporate like a public health component and air quality component.
Okay, great.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Sarah.
Obviously, dovetailing on what Madeline raised with regards to public health, I think it would be nice for the goals and objectives to be numbered because I was having a hard time formulating my comments, but I guess it's maybe goal number 2. It's I'm noticing that we don't have specific language around reducing congestion, traffic congestion, and air quality isn't called out here, as Madeline pointed out. And so, having goals that would help us reduce standing traffic as well as keeping traffic off of the roads. So I noticed in the kind of the companion document that was sent out, people talked about, encouraging carpooling and telework and things like that. So I don't know if Measure T has the ability for us to actually facilitate other kinds of things that would reduce people on the road. And then also that goes along with that is infrastructure for electric vehicles. Is not included anywhere in the goals as they're drafted.
Infrastructure, I'm sorry, I missed it. I was accidentally. Infrastructure for what? I'm sorry.
Electric vehicles.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we have listed them in the priorities, I believe.
Right.
But it may not be, but that's something that we could definitely add here, not a problem.
Yeah, and goal number 2 there, we're talking about walking, biking, electric vehicles. That's where it feels like it might fit.
Okay, sure. Makes sense. Okay.
And all right, thank you, Sarah. And Derek Robinson.
All right, how you doing, ladies and gentlemen? Yes,
great. How are you?
Oh, fine. I like to say that when I was on the city council, I was concerned about Raymond Road and 16 and 21 and a half where Kennedy meet. I think they need a circle, a traffic circle, because I've been advocating for that for at least 8 years. And cars are flying by around 70 miles per hour, and then you're trying to make a turn, and people are going, we say, toward Yosemite, from Cleveland, and they make that turn, and you can't see the cars that are stopped and that are making a left turn on 16, and so that's just a recipe for disaster right there. On Raymond Road and 16, where Kennedy meet.
And I think that is something that we could add to the priorities. Make sure that roundabouts or traffic circles are called out.
Yeah,
the county has implemented some, specifically one that I'm aware of up in the North Fork area, and it's working out very well. So I believe it's working out very well, at least every time I go through it. So,
well, you have a big piece of land right there. Right in the middle.
Yeah.
And also, I like to say about the border streets in the city, where the city and the county meet. A lot of times they are neglected. And so a lot of those streets are heavily used by traffic, especially during work hours. And then another one is Madeira Community College. In front of the college, that's like blood alley to me, because you can't even see.
Color baby Coke.
Yes, real dark.
If everyone can mute their system so that there's no interruption. Sorry. Go ahead, Derek. I'm sorry.
It's really dark right there. I was driving there to a meeting and going up Avenue 12 to the ranchos, and I could hardly see. I had my glasses on. And they can put some lights right there along the streets. You can see the where you say the island in the middle of the street. It comes, it's black with rubber tires. People have been hitting that, and you got those.
So maybe some safety improvements along that stretch of Avenue 12.
2 lanes there, because students are turning left, into the college, and you have to wait, and it's a long line. It's bad. And then let me see, another one, the last one is turning lanes. We need a lot of turning lanes to reduce the standing traffic. If you can just paint a line where 2 lanes forward and the 3rd lane on the right for turning, that would improve traffic immensely and reduce a lot of the standing traffic.
Okay, that sounds great. We'll make sure, I think some of the priorities that we've listed and the eligible projects that we've identified do reflect some of these improvements, but we'll make sure that we incorporate them all. And we want to incorporate everything that you all believe are priorities or goals and objectives so that we can use this information to get to the programs.
You know what? I'm not going to mention Cleveland, you know, by the railroad, you know.
You're right. Yeah, it's always been an issue.
That's a toss up.
All right.
I used to live north on let's see, Road 26. So I know what you mean.
You know, because they need some line painted because some of the cars, they don't know if they're going to go left on Yosemite or going straight to Cleveland or whatever. You know, it's, you know, they're guessing.
Right.
Right. Well, thank you, Derek. Thanks for, it's great having your input and thanks for being with us.
Hey, I'm warming up, you know.
That's right. You're making up for lost time. All
Yeah.
right.
Okay.
All right. Let's go ahead and go to Conrad. I think Conrad's got his hand up.
I do, yes. Am I unmuted? I'm not sure.
There you go.
Okay,
All
yeah,
right.
Conrad here. Well, with all these important goals and objectives, mine is kind of small, but it's important to some people. And that would be cyclists such as myself. I know we have many challenges in Madera County transportation wise. I'm on the elementary school board, and of course, busing is a big issue for us here in northern Madera County. But back to cycling, I would say that anytime a road is repaved, as several have been in recent years, it would really be great for cyclists if a paved, you know, the edge of the road, what do you call it? Would
Shoulder.
be the shoulder, thank you. So I was thinking of the verge, like they say in Britain. But anyway, yeah, the shoulder is paved so that cyclists, such as myself and others that I see, are basically out of the roadway. And I will say that 90–95% of the drivers that come up behind me are very polite. They move over to the left side of the road if they can, but it is kind of a big truck goes by, it's kind of scary if you're on the road. So that's the
Right.
idea. If the shoulder could be paved, I'll give an example. It's road 25 from Avenue 25 from road 13 all the way to the a line of Merced County has a great shoulder on it, and I really like going out that way. That's my comment. Thank you. I'm very interested in all of this.
All right. Well,
Thank
very
you.
good. Thank you, Conrad. Thank you for those remarks. We have, looks like we have John Reed next.
Yeah, thank you very much. I did post in the chat one comment. The only place I see the word safe in all of our goals is the one that says efficient, safe, and secure transportation in the Madera region. And piggybacking on what Derek was talking about, there are a lot of areas where there's just some poor design or situations that have developed that are just not safe transportation. So I think going back to the very beginning in all of our goals, there ought to be the word, however, whether it's equitable, it should also be safe. And whether it's coordinated, it should also be safe. I think that safety, especially on what we have existing out there that can be improved and made more, we've got areas where curves in the road don't maintain the same radius. So you have to switch radius in the midst of a curve. You have areas where you still have water that streams across the road. In the mountains, you can form ice sheets. There's just areas that you've got a quick reduction in speed necessary from a 55 zone down to a 25 zone. Those areas can all be looked at and improved. And I don't think that the goals strongly enough lean towards improving our safety system. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. We'll take a look at that, and as appropriate, we'll emphasize safety to a greater extent.
All right. Thank you. Are there any other comments?
Okay, so going to the transportation system priorities. As mentioned, Rose has been in contact with all of you. Some of you were at the meeting, I believe it was in October, maybe September, where we asked you to provide us with your top 3 priorities, or at least your top priorities for the new measure. As I mentioned, we've also taken into consideration the results of the polling and any public outreach that's been accommodated over the last few months as a part of this process, including surveys that have been taken online. So based upon that information, we've prepared a list of system priorities, and I'll take you through each one of these now. They do identify what we mean by repairing and maintaining streets or an improved system of active transportation projects, because you can see that the example of projects that we've provided underneath each one of these priorities. So the first is repairing and maintaining streets and roads in existing neighborhoods. So you can see that that includes pavement rehab, pothole repair, et cetera, drainage improvements, which are also important, especially in the unincorporated area. Operational improvements, including signals, shoulder widening, median improvements. That would also include roundabouts because they're a replacement for traffic signals in a lot of cases. The regional pavement management system, right now, each jurisdiction, and you had a presentation on this at the last, I believe the last meeting, where they identify how they're maintaining their system, how well they're doing, taking it through an evaluation process. We may be looking at a regional pavement management system so that MCTC can work with the local jurisdictions and the county and Caltrans to identify a regional pavement management system that would help us further ensure that the Measure T dollars are being spent where they need to be spent. An improved system of active transportation projects, and that includes bicycle, pedestrian, and trails or path type projects. So that includes also the pedestrian facilities, American with Disability Act projects, ADA projects, and then safe routes to school. It's important that our kids get to the schools on sidewalks that are not have gaps in them, or they're not tracking through mud and debris to get to the school. That they can ride their bike with ease and safe from the motoring automobiles adjacent to them. Next, we have addressed local transportation needs. All of us know that there are local jurisdictions know what the needs are. Each of the cities and the county know how best to, or what the needs are out there in their jurisdiction. And so some of those needs include street maintenance, pothole repair, street widening, the signals, roundabouts, curbs, gutters, street lights, as mentioned by one of you. We've added bridge program and projects to this because it was inadvertently left off. And so we need to make sure that bridges are included here. Enhanced public transit services. They each operate their own transit systems, so they're well aware of what those needs are as well. The active transportation projects, the bikeways, trails, pedestrian improvements, other related projects or programs that are individual to a particular neighborhood or community or to their city. And then grant applications. This is important because a lot of the funding now, as Tricia mentioned, even the federal funding programs that are coming out are going to be competitive. And it's important to have the funds to be able to write the grants to get the funding. And so that's something that's been identified here as well. Transportation projects that improve community health, air quality, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. I think that was something that was mentioned by a couple of you, including Sarah and others. So transit-oriented development, placing land use near transit hubs, reducing the need for automobiles, enhancing the walkability from those residential units to the transit stations or the transit area. Electric charging stations, making it easier to charge your vehicle and use electric vehicles versus continued reliance on gas-powered or diesel fuel. Congestion pricing, that's not something that a lot of jurisdictions in the Valley are used to hearing about, but it is something that needs to be discussed, and it may be a viable option for the future, especially as funding is more scarce as we move forward. Land use incentives to reduce vehicle miles traveled, and that's really important because the Regional Transportation Plan Sustainable Community Strategy has to meet thresholds established by the Air Resources Board, and those vehicle miles traveled have to be reduced, and there are targets that have to be met. So it's important that we identify land uses and transportation systems that will accommodate a reduced vehicle mile traveled scenario. E-bikes and scooters, electric vehicles, and it could be other types of alternatively fueled vehicles, not just electric. And then engine and vehicle upgrades for cleaner technologies to reduce air emissions. Next, we have an improved public transit system. So this is the traditional type of transit system that's been provided in Madera County and elsewhere, of course, enhancing that, providing for enhanced urban and rural fixed route transit services. That includes bus rapid transit routes and systems. You don't have bus rapid transit yet, but it's something that's on the horizon. They now have a system in Fresno. It's just a matter of time. It's something that we've talked about with the Madera County Regional Transportation Plan in the past about corridors, bus corridors. And so it's something that may come up in the future. Existing transit service improvements and extensions, of course, as growth continues, making sure that areas that are currently not accessible to transit are provided transit to the extent possible and feasible. Whoops, I'm not sure why that changed, but it did. Automated fare box systems, fleet conversion to electric buses. That's really important funding wise because the feds are now requiring, the federal agencies, Federal Transit Agency is requiring that the buses be upgraded to electric buses. That's a huge cost. You can well imagine what that's going to run. Reduced fares, especially for low-income areas. Bus stop amenities so that it makes it easier for people to stay at the bus stop and wait for their buses without being drenched or without being, without roasting to death in the middle of summer because we have very hot summers. So making sure that those bus stop amenities are there for them to keep them as comfortable as possible and to know when the bus is coming. Where is it? Improve service reliability and predictability. And enhanced urban and rural on-demand transit services. So making sure that our seniors and our disabled are able to access the system and request a ride when they need one. In terms of new and innovative public transit services and systems, of course, we're looking at Uber and Lyft services. That's something that is available in some of the metro areas in the Valley. On-demand transit expansion, so expanding those services to those who are in need. Driverless shuttles, that's something that's being studied across the nation. And I know we do have some companies that are really focused on ensuring or focused on developing driverless vehicles and driverless shuttles as we move forward. First and last mile connections to transit, including using bikes, scooters, Uber, Lyft, and other modes, microtransit, shared rides, and shared vehicles. And some of these are already taking place throughout the region. Then we have enhanced social service transportation programs. Some of these are not available currently in Madera County, but just something to think about as we move forward with this measure. So a senior script program. Fresno County has a senior script program. It's funded by their measure. It's very successful. It's something we may want to look at here. So it provides reduced fares and discounted fares to seniors and the disabled for trips by taxi or Lyft or Uber, et cetera. Carpools and van pools. So focusing on those, agricultural worker van pools using our Cal vans. And it's just a matter of reducing trips, which reduces vehicle miles traveled. And that's really what we're trying to get at. On-demand American with Disability rights. So making sure that disabled are accommodated ADA senior, senior disabled transit fare subsidies, as I mentioned previously, and then freeway service patrol. So making sure that if there's someone that's broken down on the system, they don't bog down the entire system. We have a system out there that will get to them as quickly as possible, get them off to the shoulder if they need to be off to the shoulder, and get them back on the road as soon as possible, or take their car where it needs to be repaired. Then we have improved regional transportation systems. So this is really what I was talking about before. These are the major urban and rural areas, street, highway, and road improvement projects. Congestion management, and that means trying to reduce congestion to the extent possible and feasible. This will optimize the performance of the existing infrastructure, the existing street system. Again, bridge programs, projects, there may be new bridges that need to be looked at, that need to be funded. There are maybe some major operational improvements. A lot of the interchange improvements, modifications are major dollar projects, and they may be eligible under this program to be addressed using Measure T funds, or at least in whole or part. And then we're looking at goods movement improvements, regional connectivity between rural and urban areas. This is important because we need to make sure that our rural areas can get to the cities and the cities can get to them for different types of services and needs. And then airport improvements. We have some public use, publicly owned airports within Madera County, and it's a potential project or potential use for Measure T funding. It's not currently something that's in the program, but something to think about. And then finally, we're looking at new technologies. What's on the horizon for the future? And we need to be cognizant of that, because this will be a 20-year, maybe a 30-year program, or maybe it'll be until ended by voters. And so we need to understand that things are going to change. There will be new technologies and innovations that will be attributable to transportation projects and programs that we need to be flexible to ensure that we can accommodate with Measure. So one of those would be future technological improvements, of course, electric vehicle, and that could be any energy source other than fossil fuels. Microgrids, solar, EV battery charging, micro mobility hubs to address a range of connected travel choices, making sure that you can get from one mode to the other simply. Innovations in micromobility, bicycles, e-bikes, scooters, skateboards, anything that has wheels on it and can get you there faster and connect to another mode of transportation. Drone delivery. This isn't something that we want to finance, of course, but we want to take into consideration the benefits of. One agency that all of us have heard about in the news is Amazon. They may be getting some of their delivery trucks off the road and delivering packages by drone. That's going to reduce vehicle miles traveled and vehicle trips. And that's important to us because of what I've said before. We have to meet targets. And any way that we can get there, we need to get there. So that's just another type of transportation improvement that's in the future that we may want to think about. And then increased opportunities for telecommuting. All of us have been doing a lot of telecommuting in the last 2 years because of the pandemic, but I think some of this is going to end up staying in place. I don't think all of us will be attending meetings like we were before. I think we'll probably prioritize whether or not that's an in-person meeting or that's a Zoom meeting. And if it's somewhat important, maybe it's a Zoom meeting, but if it's really important, maybe it's an in-person meeting. So I think that there are a lot of opportunities to increase telecommuting as a result of what we've been through the last couple of years. So with that, we're open to any questions you might have.
Very good, thank you. And it's too bad we don't have any system priorities. No, just teasing. Thank you, everybody, for your great contributions. And so as far as comments go, it looks like we have a comment from Derek.
Yes, you're talking about flexibility. You were saying, for instance, scooters, bikes, and I've even seen some people with one wheel going down the street. But I was thinking about jobs, right? Especially for those who are, jobless and they could even become entrepreneurs. But, during my travel around the world, like in the Philippines, they have three-wheel, cycle mode of transportation and license, and they're, they go-getters, right? They go out there and they get people, they flag them down, they get in, and it's a cheap, mode of transportation. I wonder if that might be another mode of transportation that we can use, and also to have for jobs, employment.
So bike commuting, yeah, that's the,
with a like motorized bike or even electric bike with
uh-huh,
a perch to the side, where you pick up people and take them where they want to go. I mean, they do it
right.
in the country, India, Philippines, you name it.
Yeah, they have been looking at that in the Bay Area as well as down in the Los Angeles area. MTA, I know, has been funding projects to look at electric bikes and scooters. And so I think it's something that it is on the horizon, definitely.
Yeah, so people can have jobs, they want to be independent. They don't.
Right.
And
Right.
it'd be a good way for them to make some money.
Right.
Yep.
Provide for themselves.
All right, well, thank you. Appreciate that. Let's go on to Jason.
Yes, thank you. So looking at this and hearing about some of this, one of our concerns that we have talked about is there seems to be many objectives and everything, which is admirable and everything, but one of the concerns is funding being tied to them, potentially creating a sort of a mess of red tape. Can't use this money unless you're doing specifically this, that. I know that the agencies have talked before about flexibility and needing to do that. Currently, City of Chowchilla receives about 7% of Measure T funding. And so that means that generally we can't do a project every year. We don't get enough funding. So we have to kind of book that, set it aside. And if we have all these sort of objectives or pots of funding for this, that, and that, and that, then it's going to be several years longer before we can get a large project completed.
Right.
And so that's one of our concerns. And then especially if funding is still tied to population size between the county, City of Madera, and City of Chowchilla, as we know, with the large developments happening in the County of Madera and City of Madera as well, that could potentially reduce our funding allocation. And then if we have all these objectives and funding tied to this and that, then maybe we're 5 years out or longer for doing an actual project.
Yeah, and we will be, based upon the input we received from you today, and some of you may want to take some of these priorities and these goals and objectives and provide us with some written comments over the next week or so. Based upon this information, at a staff level, we're going to work with MCTC staff to put together an initial list of programs. It's just a starting point. We don't want to come to you and say, okay, it's a free for all, everybody, let's just start putting these programs together. I think it's going to help you if you see something, and then we can revise from there, refine, add to, etc. And that's one of the things that we will be taking into consideration is flexibility. We understand that this is, it's not Fresno County, it's not San Joaquin County, it's not Kern County. This is a smaller rural county, and the funding availability is just not as prevalent as it is in some of those larger counties where it's easier to, on an annual basis, fund projects. So we're going to be taking that into consideration as we start to look at the programs, and we'll be coming back to you next month with that very preliminary, very draft list of programs. But that's something that we're just in discussions about, and we will keep that in mind.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And just to add on to that, because one of the concerns too related to all of that is, economies of scale.
Right.
you know,
Exactly.
for the city of Chowchilla, you know, a project is probably a bit more expensive than what, you know, the county can do because they're able to package a lot more together than what we're able to do. And so on average, it tends to cost just a bit more. You know, when we can partner with another agency like the county on Road 16 or whatever, that's great. But obviously we can't do that within our core. And so that's why this becomes a concern to us.
Yeah, we understand. Thank you.
All right, so we've got 4 with hands up. So let's start with Frank, then we'll go to Madeline, Eric, and John.
Thank you. Since I do represent the disabled, the elderly, and low income, is why I'm here. I just want to make sure that we will be looking at, I saw it on there, perhaps public-private partnerships for transportation, very specifically out of the mountains for doctor appointments that have to go to specialists down in the cities, whether that's the city of Madera or the city of Fresno, especially for the elderly. A lot of them can't drive. I personally am the disabled member on the council. I'm legally blind myself, and I don't drive. And finding rides, believe it or not, even to the grocery store, are a very difficult thing to do and is a very real concern. And since Measure T is a special tax over, above, and beyond the existing taxes we pay for our roads and everything, I'd like to see one of the priorities at least addressing this issue as to what we can do. And as was just previously mentioned, keeping it very flexible so our county supervisors and our city managers aren't stuck with how to use funds, but being flexible to meet needs as they arise. Even more concerning is if we renew this for 30 years and we write it out where it's not flexible, we're stuck. So staying flexible on this becomes very important as well.
Understood.
All right, thank you. Madeline.
Thanks. So I wrote down a couple things as you were going through these priorities that I wanted to highlight. The first is, I know that one of the first things we talked about in the goals was the importance of equity in transportation investments. And now that we're going into system priorities, I'm not really seeing anywhere where it's clear how exactly equity is going to be prioritized. And I think that 2 key areas for ensuring that it is would be in, as I've said before, incorporating an equity component into the pavement management system so that we can ensure that disadvantaged unincorporated communities that are often overlooked with the existing scoring formula are not told to wait year after year for their local street repavement and repair projects to be prioritized. And then also, as we take on more clean mobility and active transportation type projects, I also want to see some equity scoring in that, because I know with the State Route 41 and Avenue 9 corridor studies, for example, there were a lot of clean mobility and active transportation projects being considered to like reduce an increase in VMTs in the new like sprawl development areas in southeastern Madera County. But what I don't want to see happen is taxpayers Measure T funds go to, facilitate great projects in a new growth area while their communities continue to be ignored. So I want to see some equity components with like all of these projects, including and especially clean mobility and active transportation. So that's one thing. As I've said before, I'm really uncomfortable with how many times widening and goods movement is mentioned here. And one of the things that we hear from residents all the time in Lavinia and Fairmead, including just recently at our RTP SCS workshops that MCTC put on with our collaboration in those communities, is immense frustration over seeing their local roads get damaged because of goods movement, and frustration that they're paying a sales tax that then goes to facilitate goods movement. So air quality is being worsened, there's damage to local streets, folks aren't seeing Measure T dollars invest in the projects that they want to see, and the roads are being impacted by heavy duty trucks and ag equipment. So I'm passing along the feedback that we're hearing on that in hopes that those allocations will be significantly reduced for those two categories. I also am a little concerned that connectivity between rural communities and urban areas is currently listed under the goods movement category, because I think that if we're going to talk about residents' ability to get where they need to go, I think that's like a public transit and local roads priority, not a goods movement priority. And then lastly, I would just say zero emission and clean mobility projects have to be a much higher percentage than projects that would facilitate automobile and heavy duty truck use for the reasons that I've talked about before regarding air quality and climate change. Thanks.
Okay, very good.
Great.
Let's go
Thank
to
you.
first to Derek, and then we'll go to John.
Okay, I was, I brought up a long time ago, but I like to say that I like to see more, when you say city connectivity, you know, like from between Oakhurst, Raymond, Corsco, Chowchilla, Madera, Ranchos, you know, whereby people can, you know, help other businesses within the county and all the different cities. Some people can't get around, and if we had some transit, you know, buses that go to those cities, I'm sure that people will get out their house and start traveling more. But I know that would be too expensive, you know, but as we grow.
I think definitely connectivity is critical across the county between all communities.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go to John, then Arnaldo, and then Sarah.
Yeah, thank you. Project specificity is politically a double-edged sword. I think it's really important from if we're going to pass this, and I am assuming that we're all working towards the goal of getting this measure passed, that there are specific projects listed that the ordinary voter will be able to relate to very closely. That's what they're going to vote for. We've got a tremendous amount of data that we've all heard that's going to go right over the head of all 95% of the voting, or maybe 90% of the voters out there. They're going to see several specific projects that they're going to benefit their area and their safety and their ability to get around, and that's what they're going to vote yes or no based on. On the other side of the coin, though, the objections that I've heard to, and the opposition that I have heard about out there, is that in the original Measure T, they didn't follow through and actually produce some of the things that were promised. And so that why should we trust that it's going to happen this time? So like I said, it's a double-edged sword, so it has to be approached carefully and done correctly from a marketing standpoint in order to get this measure passed.
All right, thank
Tricia,
you.
I'm sorry, Tricia or Troy, would you like to respond to that last comment?
Well, that's the perception out there that who didn't deliver what was promised. There are certain projects due to funding amounts up in the foothill area that was not delivered, that was listed as a project, not necessarily to be included, but was listed on the regional project list. So we had to go through a process to identify a couple of other projects in the mountain area, and that had to do with Deadwood. For the most part, I believe that the program delivered what was promised, that we could. Just like we've mentioned through this meeting, things change over the years. And so what happened with that measure was state funding changed. And so we had some assumptions written into the plan regarding funding for the regional program, which the state, I think a year later or that same year, changed the process of funding. So we had to kind of adapt and do the best that we could with the funding that we had available to us. And I think we did an awesome job leveraging, double or over double the amount of funding that we have received in terms of revenues. So it's just a matter of education. So public education, getting out there and talking to the community, which later on our agenda that will be discussed, as I mentioned earlier. So I think we need to do a better job at educating the public on what was delivered with the current measure program, what needs to be done. And as Georgina mentioned, we're never going to have enough money to do what we would love to do in our communities in Madera. And so that's why we're here talking about a renewal, because we need as much funding as we can for transportation purposes. It's so broad. And so I think education is the response to that question. Excuse me.
And I'd like to add in on that. As many people on this call know, a few years ago, we had a road assessment in the county of Madera. And at that time, and this was a couple of years ago before the current inflation rate hit, it just to keep roads where they are now took $16 million a year. We have over 1,500 miles of roads to maintain in Madera County, and we needed $16 million a year. We were bringing in $12 million a year. So every year, our roads are getting $4 million worse, and with inflation, today they're probably getting $5 million worse. So we just don't have the money at this time, and so that's why it's so critical to pass this measure. So anyway, I just wanted to add that in about just to emphasize your point about we're just not going to have all the money necessary to do what we want to do. We have to be really smart, analytical, and very strategic. Let's go to Arnaldo.
Thank you, Chair Poitras. First, let me preface by saying that I agree with a lot of the statements that are being made. I think collectively we all have the same goal, and I think as I believe John said a few minutes ago, that it appears we're all working towards the same goal. I think collectively or individually, there's probably some slightly different outcomes in terms of drone delivery, EVs, bike paths, highway miles, and everything else. I think one thing to keep in mind is that I think as we're moving forward, in order to entice the voters, we're probably going to have a couple of relatively sexy projects to try to encourage people. With that being said, I think one thing from my perspective that we probably want to do, at least initially for the first couple of years, is really hone in on mitigating existing challenges. I think one of the concerns that from my perspective that I would have, and I think this goes to what a lot of people are saying, or to some of the comments, not a lot, but to some of the comments, is that we should be mitigating the existing challenges, not trying to add future capacity. I think we all need future capacity, and because what we don't want to do is 20 years down the road to be in such a position where it's challenging, where then we then have to mitigate additional. Today, existing new development should be mitigating future issues or the issues they're causing. The challenge that I think all of us are facing are existing issues, going back to Supervisor Poitras's comment that we can't even maintain what we have. If the county had $16 million, it's probably significantly a lot more than that now. And so I think one thing that we could probably collectively agree on, I'm hoping, is that maybe collectively we say, for the first 5 years of funding, it's going to go to address existing deficiencies. In theory, new development should have no deficiencies whatsoever, because if the city, the county, both the city of Madera, the county, and the city of Chowchilla are properly mitigating new development, in theory, it should pay for itself. Does it always happen like that? Well, I think it's up to the people on this call to make sure it's happening. If not, we're failing our constituents. With that being said, though, I really think that, I think initially we have to address existing deficiencies. We have to pay for our father's sins. And granted, some of it was 100 years ago, but that's water under the bridge. We have to move on. We have to acknowledge that we have some issues here. Let's move united to say we have to address, sidewalk breaks, safe routes to school. We're going to need some additional bridges, but we have to start repaving a lot of our roadways, regardless of what community they're in. We have really bad roads in Madera collectively. And I think if the focus can be to the voter, we have to improve what we have, and we're not going to go out and make a dramatic new and shiny is always great. The problem is you can't ignore what we have. With that being said, though, we have some major deficiencies where we are probably going to have to widen. For example, in the city of Madera, we have to widen the Schnorr or the Granada Bridge. That it's deficient. It's woefully deficient. I know Chowchilla has major issues, and I know the county does as well. So the reason I say this is I think we're all paddling in the same direction. It sounds like we all want to get to the same spot, but it's just a little muddy right now. But I appreciate everyone's comments. But in order to get this approved by the voters, I really think we're gonna have to hone in a little bit to identify a couple of projects that probably aren't the sexiest, right? They're not new interchanges, but it's to address existing deficiencies. And as a voter, that's what I would advocate for. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Ronaldo. Really good comments. Sarah.
So in the spirit of the comment that was made several people back about flexibility with the funding, I think it would be good to include with kind of writing grants, being able to write grants for funding that also reduces traffic. Like I think about the broadband funding that's being going to roll out from the state, and that would facilitate more telework, reducing the cost of the roads we already have, maintaining those. So I think it would be good to include in the language flexibility about what that, if we have funding that's going towards grant writing, that we're really broad about how we are able to utilize that to write for grants that would impact transportation. And it would be more of an upstream intervention.
Great. Sounds good. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Any other comments regarding this item? I think we've had a good discussion and a lot of great input.
And if you have additional comments, I'm sorry, Rob.
No, go ahead.
Supervisor Poitras. If you have any additional comments, please get them to us as soon as possible. We will likely have just one meeting in January, but we'd like to be able to update these two documents and make sure we've captured everything so that we can bring you that initial listing of programs in January. So maybe by the 1st of January, provide us with your comments on both the goals, objectives, and these priorities. That would be wonderful.
All right, thank you. So it looks like the next item is item 4, major renewal duration alternatives.
Yes, and I'm going to ask Troy to help me out with this, and Tricia. Of course, we've talked to you about this before. There are currently 3 alternatives to how long this measure should be in place. The first is 20 years, which is consistent with the current measure, Measure T. The second is to go for 30 years. And then the third is until ended by voters. The voter poll did test the alternatives. And of course, until ended by voters was the highest approval rating through the polling process. That poll was taken this last summer. So you can see under alternative 1, the proceeds from the measure over a 20-year program would be about $460 million. If we were to go 30 years, then that goes up to 866, almost 867 million. And then of course, anything that's the until ended by voters just depends on when that's ended. And so we don't have an estimate, but it would not require us to go through this process of updating the plan. There likely would be some check-in points that would be included in the implementing guidelines so that the plan could be updated and reflective of current conditions or anticipated transportation programs. So again, these are the 3 alternatives. We'd like to get the committee to make a recommendation to the Madera County Transportation Authority related to these duration alternatives so that we can assume whichever alternative as we start to move forward with the measure planning process. Troy and Tricia, did you have anything you wanted to add? Or even Charles from TVWBH?
Regina, I think I'll just add that, just in these projections, obviously just reasonable assumptions were made and based upon historical averages. And when you're forecasting things, it's always a tricky thing. And so we're hopeful that we'll get this much money to come in.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm sorry I didn't mention it myself. Tricia, did you want to add anything?
There's a question in the chat. Can you share again how you worded the question regarding the duration of the tax and the polling? And I'm not sure if we have that in front of us right now, Charles, or, we don't have.
Yeah, I can address that, Tricia. So yeah, the way we explored that issue in the polling was we conducted a split sample poll. So, the poll was conducted among a representative sample of voters likely to participate in the November 2022 election. And each time we asked voters the mock-up of the ballot question that would actually appear on ballots, a random half of that likely voter sample received language that expressed, as it would on the actual ballot, that the measure would automatically expire in 20 years. The other random half of the sample received a mock-up of the ballot language that said the measure would expire only when ended by voters. And again, we're following the legal language that's required to be on the ballot, so it's an accurate replication of the voting experience. And we consistently saw throughout the polling that support among the random half that heard the until ended by voters option was about 2 to 4 percentage points higher than the half that heard the 20-year duration. We looked at this issue in one other way in the polling. So the polling replicated the campaign environment by testing arguments in favor of the measure, but also arguments against the measure that opponents of the measure might use. And one of the arguments tested was, this measure does not include a sunset date, it'll go on forever. And of all the negative arguments against a measure that we tested, that was the least compelling to voters. So all of us gives us confidence that if we were to put a measure on the ballot until ended by voters, that it would be supported.
Thanks, Charles. And can I see the language that you're talking about for those questions?
Yeah, that was shared at the first steering committee meeting, and we can forward that to you, Madeline.
Thank you.
Yeah, and it should be on the website as well. All of the agendas and PowerPoints that we presented all these materials with are on the MCTA Measure T website.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh.
Okay, now looks, there's a question from Ellen. Is there a risk that until ended by voters could be sooner than 20 years?
Yes, there would be. And Charles, would you want to further elaborate?
Yeah, sure. So for any tax measure that you pass, the voters and the citizens always have the right to the initiative process. So even if we did a 5-year tax, in year 2 or 3, the voters could put a citizens initiative on the ballot to repeal that tax. So no matter what duration we choose, the voters, always have the opportunity to repeal it sooner. Now, significant process, you have to collect signatures to qualify for the ballot, et cetera. The experience of public agencies that have done these measures, either until ended by voters or for longer durations, is that it's quite a bit of controversy before voters will go to that length. So the vast majority of these measures reach the duration that's written into their measure, and there's plenty of until ended by voters measures out there that are just continuing to chug along uninterrupted.
Right. It's rare that they are stopped through an initiative of voters or the public. That we haven't seen a lot of those happen across the board in California. So and the other thing to keep in mind is there is a citizens oversight committee associated with the current measure where it's likely to continue with the new measure. And so there is a group that meets on specified months during the year, and they do review all of the transactions and status of the Measure T program, and they weigh in on whether they think it's something that's if there might be an issue or a problem. There are also audits that are done, of course, through MCTC as part of their planning process and financial program. So there are some checks and balances that are in place currently.
All right, thank you, Arnaldo.
And thank you, everyone. Charles, I may have missed this, but was the ask for a half-cent sales tax measure, or was it just a sales tax measure in general?
No, it's to extend the existing half-cent sales tax measure.
Okay.
Yeah, the tax rate that you're requesting is legally required to be in the ballot question, and that's how we presented it in the poll.
Okay, so collectively, do we think that's appropriate? That's where I would start, or do we think that an increase to the existing tax would be appropriate, or do we collectively feel that that would be dead on arrival? And I'm saying collectively. I don't know, Charles, you may have some insight on this.
I can speak to the polling and that we didn't contemplate an increase in the tax rate. Our focus was on extending the existing rate, and we saw support levels, north of 70% for that. So, we certainly think that's viable. I think that I'd be a little bit surprised if we saw similar support if we were increasing the tax rate.
No.
But we haven't investigated that specifically.
Good. Thank you.
All right, very good. Madeline.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you're looking for input on what the duration of the tax should be, but I just wanted to say that I think it's really concerning to have a tax that's until ended by voters, not because I don't think that Measure T is important, and I think that the funding should be around, as long as it is needed, which I think is indefinite. But the thing that's really concerning to me is I don't think it's fair for Madera County voters to get stuck with an expenditure plan that's created in 2021 indefinitely, because we know how much things change. We know that Madera County is completely different now than it was 20 years ago. And so that's the concern on our end. And I want to make sure that this half-cent sales tax is as democratic as possible, so that voters are able to adjust it whenever is needed. And I still feel a little bit unclear on what the process would be if it isn't up for renewal on a ballot for voters to initiate a process to alter the expenditure plan without completely creating a ballot referendum to end the tax.
Well, again, as I mentioned, there will likely be some, in the implementing guidelines, there will likely be some check-in points that will have to be adhered to or addressed as the measure moves through year by year. So maybe at 5 or 10-year increments, there would be a point where the entire plan would be revisited to ensure that it is still on track with what the needs are in the county. That's not something I can tell you what that specific wording will be right now, because we're not at the implementing guidelines. But that's the way other measure counties have handled it. It's not just prepare a plan and then just everybody just go their separate way and whatever in the plan gets implemented, because this will be an ongoing process. So there has to be intervals where projects and programs are revisited to ensure that they're still addressing the needs of the county and all of its cities.
All right, very good. And Derek. Derek Robinson. Looks like you're muted. Well, when Derek's unmuted, we'll go ahead and hear his comment. I just had a question, and I think, Georgina, you mentioned, so we submit our comments regarding the duration to MCTC, or how do we, where's the decision point?
Yeah, the decision point is today. We'd like to get the committee to achieve a consensus on one of these alternatives, if it's possible. If you need to come back next month and make the decision at that point, that's fine. But it helps us from a planning perspective to know whether we're looking at 20 years or 30 years, as you can well imagine, because of the funding that's involved. So, or until ended by voters. So if it's possible to achieve consensus today, if not, then there's the option to take a vote and majority would rule, or consider this at the next meeting.
Okay, thanks for answering that. Derek Robinson.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. You know, Ford magazine, you know, they listed Madera County as #1 in housing starts. All right. And, you know, the county and the city, you know, they're busting loose at the seams, you know. And I like to say that Measure T should be indefinite to maintain the need of the county. And if you want a nice community, you got to pay for it. And half a cent is not that much. It's the same, and it should be maintained the same, but extended indefinitely. Because people complain right now about, well, the rental housing are not up to par. And so then we passed this measure whereby the landlord, you know, will have to have their property inspected to bring it up to standards. And then we find out that, you know, the rent went up because they passed that $100 fee onto the renters, you know what I mean? So like if you want a nice community, you got to pay for it. You go to Hollywood or Beverly Hills, you know, you look down their alleys, they're all paved, right? And because they got standards. And so we have to maintain our standards. We can't allow anyone to come into Madera County and put up a shack, you know. And so, like I said, if you want a nice community and you want our city to thrive, then we should have this half-cent tax measure indefinitely. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Christina.
Thank you, Rob. I will have to echo Madeline's sentiments in that implementing a tax indefinitely and waiting for voter approval to come back to eliminate the tax, change the tax, whatever it is, I think it's very concerning. I mean, we have seen how things have changed from a government standpoint over the years, and just implementing something indefinitely and not creating a system of checks and balances, which I think setting a term for that does, right? Because here we are at the end of a 20-year proposal, looking at what worked, what didn't work, and what we need to do. And if you set something indefinitely, I feel like we do lose some of that. So on that front, I would suggest that we keep it and maintain it a 20-year, because the other thing to take into consideration is the inflation and, you know, how the economy is going to change or not change. I mean, this year we've seen a significant increase in inflation, and the cost of projects are going to change. So we could start something now, and then, I mean, as we've seen with many projects, we can get something started, and then 3 years it's increased by 10%, and then 3 years later it's another 15%. You know, unfortunately, as much as I love budgets, I feel like, and no offense to all of the government officials on the phone, but budgets are really nothing in most stances because they change so much, and there's change orders. And I mean, we're looking at something, and I think you're all aware that the Farm Bureau has a position against the high-speed rail, but we saw something that should have been $17 billion is now at $80 billion. And so it's very unfortunate. And I think keeping something a little more constrained, a little reeled in needs to happen, versus just setting something and leaving it there for an indefinite term. And then also to Arnaldo's point earlier, and to Mr. Robertson's comments, in that, you know, we do need to make our communities better, but we also need to leverage, you know, with there's a lot of new development that's happening in Madera County. And with that new development, we need to leverage the funding of those developments against state funds. So instead of just saying, okay, as a development, you've got to do X, Y, and Z, the county also needs to say, well, they're putting in this much money, we need to leverage that against state and federal funds to get improved main corridors in place. So just my thoughts for the moment. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Tim Curley.
Yeah, thanks, Supervisor. I feel like we need to talk about this a little bit more, and particularly since we're past our 2 hours. And if we're able to table it until the next meeting to make a decision, I'd prefer that, because I'm actually really just kind of struggling between the 3 different options. And for some reason, I'm not confident that this community is gonna, in the end, support a tax measure that has no end to it. I'm just thinking about the politics of it. So it would be helpful for me to see, even if it's just a high level set of pros and cons for each of those 3 options. And if we're able to carve out some time during the next meeting to review it and then make a decision, then that's preferable to me. And I have a pretty hard stop to jump off this call.
Yeah,
I think that makes sense, Rob.
Yeah, I do. I think it's, so let's go ahead and get some alternatives out there, give people a chance to consider that, pros and cons, and then we'll revisit this at the next meeting.
Sounds
good.
good.
So thank you. Yeah, I know everybody, we're past 4 o'clock, and I apologize for that. And those of you need to jump off, feel free to do so. We need to really get moving on the next few items because everybody's got other things that we need to do. So let's look at 5, public engagement status and update.
And I'm going to turn this over to TBWBH, to Alex, and she and Charles are going to take us through very briefly what they've been up to as it relates to community engagement.
Yeah, thanks, Georgina. This is Charles. I'll be quick on this. At the last steering committee meeting, there were just some questions about the game plan for making sure that the public at large was aware of what Measure T has accomplished to date, but also what the plan for renewed Measure T would be. So we'll quickly just share kind of what we've accomplished to date in terms of that outreach, and then what the game plan is moving forward. So as everyone on this meeting is aware, we started by conducting stakeholder interviews to help build the steering committee membership and ensure broad representation from throughout the county. Beyond the groups that were invited to participate in the steering committee process, we've also been conducting an online survey to gauge priorities and interests among a broader group of groups and organizations, opinion leaders, other stakeholders in the community. And we'll be publishing a memo that summarizes the results of that survey here shortly after the first of the year, so everyone has the benefit of that data. And that's what was referenced earlier in terms of what's been factored into the goals and priorities that are being developed currently. We've also developed some branding, which you can see in the upper left-hand corner of the slide, just so that we can start building some awareness and visual recognition of this process in the county. And along with that, we've drafted talking points, frequently asked questions, a fact sheet, and web content, which is currently published on the MCTC website, so that there's available information for those that are seeking it. And then one of our findings in our initial outreach was that the level of awareness of what Measure T has accomplished to date is rather low, even among kind of key opinion leaders in the community. So we've been working to build out messaging and mechanisms for making sure people understand what's been accomplished to date. And that will take a number of different forms. But let me quickly just turn it over to Alex here, and maybe Alex, you can quickly summarize some of the examples of those communication materials, and then we'll talk about the game plan from here.
Yes, and then Georgina, I'm just going to share my screen, and I'll raise my hand so you can find me. So very quickly, when we talk about transportation, sometimes it can be a little confusing, even I will admit that. So we're trying to make this also a visual project when we talk to the community and the voters. So what we've done is we've put together a visual map, obviously not to scale, but kind of just doing really simple highlights of what Measure T has done and accomplished in the county. And we'll be using this map in different ways to highlight the different things that Measure T has done. So you'll see here kind of moving throughout the county, we have different things that Measure T has done as a visual. So you'll see that map some more. FAQs, won't run through these, but they are up on the website, and we'll be sure that they do get emailed out to you with the packet as steering committee members. Again, talking points, these will constantly be updated as we go through this process. So just letting you know that we'll get you updated versions as needed. But it just helps you go out and talk to your constituents, to members of your community, so that we're helping spread the message about Measure T as we go through this process. And then just a fact sheet that kind of summarizes the talking points, what we've talked about, what Measure T has done, how you can give your input and where you can go to give that input, and then just highlighting our visual again.
Thanks, Alex. And all of these materials are available on the MCTC website for download. And I can see there in the chat that the URL has been added there. So, what we've been discussing today is kind of what we've done to support the stakeholder outreach process and the development of the steering committee. As we get into the new year, we'll want to broaden that outreach to kind of the general public. We've conducted polling initially of the general public at large, but up to this point, it's been kind of early relative to putting this measure on the November 2022 ballot to expand the conversation to voters generally. But that's going to change as we get into 2022. So we're going to be looking to utilize social media, direct mail. We're in the process of developing an informational video to convey this messaging that we've been talking about, what Measure T has accomplished to date, and then what the renewal plan is for going forward. And we're going to ask all of you to use your reach to your own constituencies to help spread that message. So we'll be sharing with you a social media toolkit with kind of ready-made messaging related to the Measure T issue to push out to your members to help raise awareness and ask people to engage in the process and provide their feedback. Once this group has developed some recommendations in terms of the investment plan and the priorities going forward, we'll conduct another round of outreach to stakeholders and opinion leaders in the community to run that investment plan by them and receive their feedback, so that before we get into an election, we feel confident that there's broad consensus and that people are aware of what the plan is for the renewal proposal. And again, utilizing digital channels in addition to traditional direct mail and print media. We'll have a series of outreach efforts that make sure that prior to this measure being placed on the ballot and before people are asked to vote, that they understand what the proposal is and what's at stake. So that's kind of an overview of the game plan, and happy to answer any questions folks have.
Very good. We'll start off with Madeline, then we'll go to John Reed.
Great, thank you for this. I know outreach is something I asked about at the beginning of the meeting, so it's good to go through this. I wanted to offer some feedback on some of the materials that are online and request that there be like sections added to maybe like the FAQs and the talking points sheets that like ask for folks' feedback on some of the things that we're trying to decide on, namely if it should be a forever tax or a 20 or 30-year measure, what percentage they think the funding should go to. And like, I think that there is a way to explain that in an accessible language for folks who are not as familiar with Measure T, by saying like, do you want it, kind of the questions that you have on your survey. Like, I think those should be on the flyers as well. And then on outreach, I wanted to ask who the leaders and stakeholders that you mentioned are, and ask if you have any plans to do direct outreach in disadvantaged unincorporated communities whose transportation needs are not yet being met. We'll certainly be doing outreach in communities where we work, of course, but I wanted to ask if that was in your plans too.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, groups representing those populations have been part of the outreach strategy. Also understanding that MCTC has a concurrent process related to the regional transportation plan going on. We've been trying to dovetail those activities so as not to duplicate transportation conversations with some of those groups. And we can certainly share with you kind of the comprehensive list of groups that are being engaged through those two processes, if you're curious to kind of see what the status is.
That'd be great. And I do just want to say, I think because of all of the like intricacies that we're dealing with of the Measure T work, of the Measure T renewal process, that it should merit its own like dedicated, workshop.
Okay, let's move on to John. John, you're muted.
Sorry about that. On the starting in January social media post, direct mail, informational video, I assume at this point those are going to be just very generic outreaches that you're not getting in, because we've got a lot of specifics that we've talked about as far as projects, or whether to go with specific projects, or where to, or try to go with flexibility. Just a lot of questions that are left unanswered. And that's the first part of my question. And the second part, will we see these posts in direct mail and informational video before you send them out?
Yes, those will be shared with the steering committee. And yeah, we're being very careful to make sure that the messaging doesn't get ahead of the work of the steering committee. So the initial round of messaging will really be backwards focused. So looking at what has Measure T done since it was approved in 2006, because again, we find that there's a pretty low level of awareness of just that basic reality. And then as we're clear on what the go forward plan looks like, we'll layer in those details closer to the measure going to the ballot.
What we don't want to do is give any ammunition to the potential opposition out there. So that's it should be done carefully.
Sure.
All right, very good. Thank you. Are there any other questions? I would ask, there is a question from Jeffrey. I would ask that staff reach out to him. It looks like it's a question that's beyond the scope of this particular meeting. So
Sure, we can do that.
So good, thank you. So let's go on to the next item. This would be next steps.
Yeah, so I have included a very preliminary update to the meeting agenda schedule. You can see everything in gray we've already accomplished. So we've accomplished quite a bit with this committee. It's you should all be very proud that we've accomplished as much as we have. So I'm really proud of the committee and what you've done so far. In January, we're looking at January 20th. We'll, as I mentioned before, we will be initiating the Measure T3 is what we call it. This is the third time around. It was called Measure A to begin with, and that last time was Measure T. And this is the third renewal, or the second renewal, third duration of the program. And then the public engagement update. There'll be a public engagement update item on each agenda, so that we know exactly where we're at with public engagement. Then I have noted here that we may have the need for 2 meetings in February. We haven't specifically identified what the date would be, the other date in February, but one of them will be the 17th, which is our typical every third Thursday of the month. And there we will hope to finalize the Measure T program listing. We may not, and that may be the need for that second meeting. We will also initiate the funding allocations, the percentage of Measure T that goes to each of the programs. And then of course, there'll be a public engagement update. And then as we start to move forward, we start going through all of those steps that I talked about before, looking at the projects, the Tier 1, Tier 2 regional projects, starting to initiate development of the implementing guidelines, and then getting us to a point where we have a draft plan that would then go to the MCTA board for approval, on to the Board of Supervisors to request that the initiative be put on the ballot. And then of course, the ballot language has to be to the elections office in August. So that is our schedule. This is likely to continue to change. It's changed every time I put it in here, for good reason, because we've got a lot of work to do. And but we know that we can get there by August. And that's all I have, unless there are any questions.
Okay, any questions? We'll move on to the last item, public comment. And as you'll notice in the agenda, there is a email address if you care to send your comments through email or by calling the number on the page. So with that, thank you everybody for joining us. We started out with 45 people, we're down to 29. But we're going to, in the future, work to be done by 4 o'clock as stated on the agenda. And that's probably going to lead maybe to another meeting. So with that, no other comments. Everybody have a great evening. Merry Christmas.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. Have a nice Christmas and New Year's.
Happy holidays. Bye-bye.
To you too. Bye.
Thank
Bye,
you. Merry
everybody.
Christmas.